Now today's Pentagon briefing. Elections in Iraq, recent violence there, and the timeline for U.S. forces. Spokesman Lawrence DiRita and Brigadier General David Rodriguez spoke for just over half an hour.
Hey Charlie, how you feeling? Doing okay?
Yeah.
Good. Good afternoon, and Happy New Year to those of you whom I haven't seen since the New Year. Wanted to just take an opportunity to catch people up on a variety of things. But one thing I wanted to acknowledge, which I think some of you may have captured while General Metz was briefing yesterday, but yesterday represented a traditional day in Iraq known as our Army Day, January 6th. Has been the traditional Iraqi Army Day. Obviously, it predates the Saddam Hussein regime. I'm told that it began 84 years ago with the birth of the Iraqi Army as it existed during that era, 1921. The Iraqis themselves celebrated it yesterday with a parade and with some announcements regarding some structure and some reorganizational merging of the Iraqi army to give it a little bit better unit identity. It's something the Iraqis justifiably are quite proud of. The Iraqi Prime Minister spoke about it somewhat yesterday. I think we've got some facts, or maybe the multinational corps has some facts or a fact sheet that we can provide to you, but it's quite a momentous time. Obviously, as the Iraqi elections draw near, Iraqi security forces are, in fact, shouldering a greater share of responsibility for security in Iraq. General Metz, General Corelli, and the others who have briefed you recently have talked something about that. I do want to comment on an issue of some interest today in particular, but let me just give you a little bit of context. Prior to the transition to Iraqi sovereignty in the middle of last year, in early 2004, the department dispatched an assessment team led by Army Major General Carl Eikenberry to evaluate the extant direction of Iraqi security force training, operations, as it existed again at the time. It was a useful thing to have done. It was one of about 5 or 6 assessment teams that we sent during that period as the transition to Iraqi sovereignty loomed. Working closely with coalition commanders and with Iraqi leaders, civilian and military, General Eikenberry made several recommendations that helped put the development of Iraqi security forces on their present path. Commander of the Central Command, the commander of multinational corps in Iraq, the chairman, secretary have agreed over the period past several weeks that it would be useful to provide another assessment. And General Gary Luck, whom I think some of you may know, served as the embedded senior mentor to General Franks and General Abizaid during the development of what became known as Operation Iraqi Freedom, has agreed to lead the assessment team. General Luck has been very involved in the last year or more, a couple of years, with lessons learned that are being done by the Joint Forces Command of Iraqi Freedom and of the war plan and of subsequent security force development, etc. There's been a number of lessons learned tapped off of that effort. We've briefed, I think, some of those things. General Luck's been involved in that. He's been, I'm told, to Iraq probably 4 or 5 times since the major combat phase. He was recently there at General Casey's request to take a look at the way that the multinational corps headquarters are organized. He's just a wealth of knowledge and has been used in a variety of mentoring capacities for a lot of senior general officers, and has agreed to develop an assessment team to go look at Iraqi security force development, take a look at where we are at the moment, make recommendations, give General Casey and the others responsible for this an assessment of how they might continue to accelerate the integration of Iraqi security forces into the Iraqi structure over there. So it's something that's important. It's something that we try and provide these kinds of assessments over time, and this is another one of those assessments. And I suspect we'll have a few questions on it, an opportunity to discuss a little bit. And with that, I'll ask maybe General Rodriguez to give a some discussion about some other points.
Okay, thank you, Mr. DiRita, and good afternoon. Security for the 18 provinces in Iraq with ballot distribution and polling sites remains a priority. Multinational forces and Iraqi security forces will continue offensive operations to ensure the conditions are set to support a safe and secure environment for the upcoming 30 January elections. Operation Unified Assistance is ongoing in Southeast Asia, as you all know. We're working closely with local officials, UN personnel, and over a dozen other countries and agencies who are assisting with the relief efforts. More than 13,000 U.S. military personnel have distributed over 365 tons of supplies. Air crews have flown more than 450 rescue, recovery, and supply missions, and almost 900 hours of flight time to bring aid to the people of the affected areas. And with that, we'll take your questions.
Mr. Oldinger.
Larry, I'm led to believe, speaking to some other people in this building, that Gary Luck's portfolio will be much broader, that while it will be, the major thing perhaps be an assessment of Iraqi training and integration, that he will have a much broader portfolio looking into the overall policy, military policy and situation in Iraq. Is that not true, or is that the
That's
only
not true. I mean, it's just not accurate.
The only thing he's going to look at is military.
His mission is to go over there and take a look at Iraqi security force development. Where are we? How's it going? Provide an assessment to the commanders over there. As I said, he's a wealth of knowledge. He's a source that General Casey and others, General Abizaid, have tapped from time to time. He's an extraordinarily intelligent individual and a very studious individual. He knows an awful lot about what we're doing in Iraq. So, but his mission and his objective is to provide some assessment of how we're doing with the security forces.
And that's the only thing he'll do.
That's his mission.
Yeah.
Is he a civilian equivalent or civilian counterpart?
I don't know the full composition of the team. He's a civilian. Obviously, he's a retired general. But this is primarily security force expertise that we're looking for. That kind of, it's more than training and equipping, because there's security forces, how they're organized and how they're being used and how they interact with other segments of Iraqi. There's police officers, but it's security forces writ large.
Larry, is there concern about how things are going with the security forces? Is this something the commanders asked for? The prior assessment by Mr. Eikenberry was done at a time when I think most people acknowledged that things weren't going well with the Iraqi security forces. Is this an indication you're concerned about it?
I would describe it the way I did, which is the Iraqi security forces are getting more and more involved in the security of Iraq. And there's some areas where they've just performed very impressively, and there's a desire to stay on track and see that they continue to perform to their utmost potential, and any ability that we have to help the folks, to help the trainers take a look and assess we all think is a good thing to do. You're always when you're assessing something continuously, it's difficult to determine if you're assessing it because you're concerned or you're assessing it because you want to continue to improve. I wouldn't characterize it beyond the way I did. It's a continual assessment, and this will help provide some expertise that is not involved in day-to-day concerns about contracting and do we have the right equipment. They can come in with a look that's a little more detached, and that's always helpful.
But Larry, you painted a pretty bright picture there, and things
I painted
going
a bright
well.
picture?
I mean,
I'm painting a picture,
yes,
and you can
yes,
describe it.
Okay, I would describe what you just said as a pretty bright picture, and you didn't express any real concerns. Are you saying there aren't any real concerns about the Iraqi security forces?
I wouldn't feel competent to discuss it beyond the way our own commanders have discussed it, and they've discussed it in the terms that I've just provided you, which is in many areas. General Metz this week talked about some impressive operations that have been conducted by the Iraqi security forces. There's always, this is a new enterprise for Iraq, and so there's an interest in seeing a mid-grade officer corps develop, and that's something that a lot of people are spending time trying to make sure we're doing all we can to help that along. There's areas where the Iraqi security forces have performed well. There's areas where they've performed suboptimally, not as well. There's areas where they've been overwhelmed by their opposition and have had to step back and live to fight another day, and there's areas where they've just plain not participated in the fight. But the general trend is in the right direction toward a lot better integration with the coalition, and a greater and rising percentage of the security responsibility of Iraq. I mean, the trends are in the proper direction. It's a question of acceleration and how well can we get it done and quickly.
And I'm sorry, did General Casey and General Abizaid ask for this, or was this something the Secretary wanted?
It's very difficult to parse how decisions like this are made. I guess I'd say that if it turns out that everybody is happy with the way this goes, there'll be 1,000 people claiming credit for it. And if it turns out that it's less useful than others wished it might be, they'll all blame Rumsfeld. But it's something that they talk several times a day, multiple times a week, and they've been talking about evaluating where we think we are with Iraqi security forces for probably 6 or 8 weeks. So, it would be hard for me to describe, how an idea germinates around here. But I know that if it's popular, there'll be a lot of people claiming credit for it.
Question about the election. President Bush has said that there won't be a delay in the election, and General Metz said yesterday that if the election were held today, 4 of the provinces, you could not hold an election. And I'm wondering, can you tell us, without revealing, operational details about future operations, what is the plan over the next 23 days to get those 4 provinces in shape for an election?
I think General Metz talked about that with they're putting emphasis on those areas with offensive operations to decrease the effectiveness of the insurgency to negatively impact the election. And that's where their focus of effort is, and that's what they're going to do between now and the election.
By the way, let me if I can just interrupt for a second. It's not clear to me that General Metz said what you said he said, that if the elections were held today, they couldn't be held. He acknowledged that there's some areas where it's going to be more difficult than others. But I'd be very careful. Maybe he said that. I just don't think he did.
I mean, I thought he said that 4 of the provinces weren't ready to have an election. My question was just, is it just a military effort? You said that there's going to be military operations. I mean,
what I talked about was just the military effort. The Iraqi, election commission is doing all kinds of things to assist with that too. But I talked about the military part of it only.
You're confident that by the 30th, the military efforts combined with the other efforts will
right. That's the goal and that's the intent. And that's
here's what General Metz said. Just to be very clear, he was asked a question. You said that 14 of 18 provinces are prepared and secured to hold elections. Is the corollary to that 4 are not prepared and secured? His answer: well, Al-Anbar, Nineveh, parts of Baghdad, and I think the Salahuddin is the next as you would rank them. Those are 4 areas that we see enough of the attacks, and we're going to continue to focus our energies and effort. I mean, so I just characterize it by using what he said, and there's 4 areas where there's more violence going on than we wish was going on, but there's going to be elections in Iraq, and they're going to be held on January 30th, and this is as the result of the transition administrative law, the UN Security Council resolutions, and the will of the Iraqi people. And General Corelli talked about polls that indicate 70 to 80%, and these are Iraqi polls, of the people in Iraq want elections. So,
General Rodriguez, how would you characterize the current capability of the Iraqi military?
I'm not going to characterize that. I think the commanders have done a good job on that on multiple occasions, and I think what Larry said is what anybody would say is obviously they've done well in certain areas, and other areas they have not done as well as we wanted. So, and that's why part of the assessment is going over to check that out.
Can you give us any idea of whether you're on track purely in terms of the numbers of trained military and security personnel that you expected to have at this time? Setting aside for a moment how
right, as far as the trained and equipped personnel, yeah, we're about on track. That's
do you know what those numbers are?
Metz gave some numbers, yes. I think he said there's 60 battalions that are operational at the moment, and he had some metrics for how many more they wanted. We can provide what we think our timeline is. I think we've done that along the way, and we'll see if there's enough.
Any of those battalions are equivalent at all in capability to a U.S. unit? Have any Iraqi forces achieved a level of training and capability that would make them on the par with American military forces?
Well,
let me then, General. I mean, you're free to try it. There is probably no battalions in the world that are on par with the U.S. battalions, so that's the wrong comparison. Are they on par with their opponents inside of Iraq? Increasingly, yes, and increasingly they're becoming very capable. Are they on par with other security forces in the region? They're going to be there. But to compare them to the United States of America, there's probably no battalions in the world that are on par with the United States of America. It's an unfair metric. Do you have anything on that?
Nor is that the goal, to make them, as proficient and equipped and fully modernized as American battalions.
Well, are any of them, have any of them met 100% of their objectives in terms of what your goals are for their performance?
Yes, there have been several of them that have done that. And, well, one of the examples that many people have understood and watched and seen multiple times has been the 36th National Guard Battalion. Has done a tremendous job in multiple operations in different places, both in conjunction with U.S. and coalition forces and on their own.
And believe me, the mentoring that the U.S. is doing with them will get them more up to speed, and that's important, and there needs to be more of that. And, the assessment that General Luck can provide can perhaps offer some additional insights into how we can achieve the objective I think you're trying to get to, which is, good enough for the region, good enough for their potential adversaries, and good enough for security inside of Iraq. I mean, that's got to be how we measure it. Carl.
Larry, to what extent are there discussions going on in this building about extending the tour of Army Reserves and National Guard beyond 24 months? And can you give us any light on that?
What there's a lot of discussion about is how do we accelerate the transformation of the United States Army into a force that is needed for this century, and that involves a wide range of notions. At the core of that is the redesign of the Army's combat power through what the Army describes as modularity, but what it really means is more rapidly deployable, agile, flexible, and powerful units that are more capable at lower levels than the current division structure permits. And the Chief of Staff of the Army and the Secretary of the Army are embarked on a very ambitious plan to transform the Army by developing about a 30% increase in the capability, the combat capability of the deployable units in the Army, by using the temporary headroom provided for by the emergency authorities that we have, that the Congress has provided. That's really the focus of Army transformation. Along with that, there's a lot of work going on to rebalancing the skills that we need out of the reserves and into the active force. That's taking time, but there's an enormous amount of energy behind it, and there's progress being made. In addition to that, there's a lot of conversion of currently military units or military billets into civilian. We've probably converted or have scheduled to convert tens of thousands of billets that are currently held by military people using new authorities that the Congress has provided to make it easier to put civilians in those billets. While all that's happening, there's going to be transition needs that might result in the temporary, for example, the temporary additional unit of forces that we have in the Army right now. I mean, we are above end strength because the authority permits that. The Army is currently assessing all of the other options that can be done temporarily. So there's thinking going on, and when there's thinking, there's a lot of leaking, and when there's leaking, there's a lot of breathless reporting. But the Army is looking at a wide range, but there are no proposals, recommendations that have been presented to do that, what you described, to make permanent any of the things that are temporary right now. We've got a range of initiatives going on to analyze the stress on the force and what can be done. But at the core of it, and you're going to see it, I think, reflected when the President submits the budget for this department, we have recommended, the department has recommended, a lot of focus on Army transformation, and I think we'll see some of that in the coming year or two in terms of resources being applied to that problem. Money.
Is increasing the 24 months among the items that are being discussed, ruminated, bandied about?
There's no specific recommendation on that. So I mean, I would
is that
just
being
prefer.
Discussed? You said a whole number of things being discussed. Is that one of the issues being discussed? Possibly extending the 24.
I am unaware of all of the things the Army is looking at that would ultimately become proposals. So there's no proposals to do that I'm aware of.
How would General Luck's analysis of what he finds going to play into that? Will this be...
It's not related to it.
Not related to
Not
it
related
at all?
Yeah.
Okay, Mr. DiRita, do you think with sending General Gary Luck to Iraq, the DoD is looking to draw or to put a new military strategy on the ground, especially that the political strategy after the election would be changed, would be different?
I believe I've answered that. General Luck's mission is what I described, and I just don't need to expand on that.
A follow-up to the modularity question. There was a budget decision made that modularity was actually the benefactor of by about $25 billion, and accompanied with that was a $30 billion cut to various weapons programs that will likely show up in the budget that's coming out soon. Can you give us some context to that? Can you tell us whether that was a reflection of some sort of very constricted budget environment, or was this an already planned transformation move?
There's a lot of things in your question that are I can't comment on because they're specific numbers that we're not prepared to discuss.
Discuss general cuts.
I don't think anybody, when they see our budget, will discuss it in terms of cuts, because this budget, our defense spending in this country has gone up 40% in the last 3 years. I'll get to it.
We've already discussed cuts.
I'll get to it. The defense spending in this department has gone up something on the order of 35 or 40% since '01. I expect, although these decisions aren't final, that there will be an increase in the defense spending this year as well. In other words, the fiscal year 2006 budget will be more than the fiscal year 2005 budget, and I'm laying aside supplementals and everything else. I know that the definition of a cut in Washington is when you don't spend as much as you wish you could spend. But a cut, the way the rest of the world thinks about it, is you're spending less than you were spending yesterday or in the previous period. That's not likely to happen in our budget. Again, without discussing details and specifics, I think what you'll see in this budget is continued commitment to transforming this department into the kind of 21st century network-centric, agile, lethal, based on precision, based on a transformed, accelerated transformation of the Army into the kind of Army I described earlier. And then when the budget comes out, we can all look at the numbers and decide whether it's closer to the way I described it or closer to the way you described it.
But numbers aside, are you saying then that the leading up to the budget submission to Congress, the transformation was the #1 issue, or was there any sort of issue of constrained
Transformation
changes?
is the #1 issue in the development of this budget. There's no question about it.
Changes in the press are reflective of a transformation agenda.
Excuse me?
The changes reflected in the press then are a reflection of a transformation agenda?
I don't know what press articles you're referring to. Maybe one you wrote. I maybe didn't see it. But when the budget comes out, we'll be happy to discuss it in great detail, and then people can draw their own conclusions. The budget that we've recommended and that I think has received general support and has been generally in the broadest brushstrokes outlined to some members of Congress is what I described, a continued commitment to transformation of this department, an acceleration of Army transformation, an acceleration of a host of other important both technological and organizational initiatives, and once all the numbers are available, we can all parse them and look at it.
Did Secretary Rumsfeld read General Helmsley's memo?
I don't know.
What's the reaction been to that memo?
Again, there's a lot of thinking going on. That was an internal document that reflected the musings of one officer to another officer on an important topic. And it's unfortunate that it leaked, and it's unfortunate that people have drawn conclusions as though thinking equals decisions. But I mean, I don't have a specific comment on his reaction to the memo because I don't know that he read it.
The reserves of degenerating into a broken force. Specifically,
I don't know. I mean, the reserves are performing magnificently. They're doing an enormous amount of important work around the world. I think people who are in the reserves feel very good about what they're doing. We're meeting our retention goals for the most part across the board in reserves. I don't know if you have anything you want.
No.
Very good.
Come over here.
There's been a lot of discussion recently of the efforts to improve the armor protection of vehicles for the US military in Iraq to adapt to the insurgency tactics there. Yesterday, the insurgents carried out a devastating attack on a Bradley fighting vehicle, one of the most heavily armoured in the US inventory. Is that not symbolic of the fact that the insurgency continues to be able to adapt its tactics more quickly than the US military does?
Well, the attack on the Bradley, we've noticed in the recent couple of weeks that the IEDs are all being built more powerfully with more explosive effort and a smaller number of IEDs, and that trend has occurred over the last 2 weeks here. But again, the IED challenge is not purely going to be met with armored vehicles because I think I explained before we've lost a tank, the most heavily armored vehicle in the world, and Bradley, like just the other day that you discussed. But the response and the way we're going to overcome that is a multi-pronged effort on tactics, techniques, procedures, intelligence, and a wide range of things to prevent that from hurting our soldiers.
But I mean, if I can add a little bit to that, I would refer you back to what I believe it was General Metz and Corelli both talked about with the IED threat. General Corelli believes for every IED that goes off, he's finding one. So he thinks he's about 1 for 1 in terms of what's out there. But you don't know the universe what's out there. But he feels like he's increasing, again, to the point that General Rodriguez made, the going after finding these things as opposed to trying to protect perfectly is one of the priorities. And General Corelli believes he's making progress in that regard. General Metz believes, and he talked about it in his press conference, that the sophistication of these things has actually decreased. He described some indicators as to why he believes that. So it's difficult to assess the trend on this particular threat, but it's one that we're going after aggressively through many directions, as General Rodriguez described.
General Rodriguez, can I follow up, though? You said you're noticing something. You mentioned the last 2 weeks. If I understood you correctly, IEDs being built more powerfully but smaller. Are you seeing
a lower number of IEDs, but they've been more powerful? So, for example,
are you seeing a different type of explosive? Are you seeing a different design?
It's more explosives in the IEDs. So a larger IED instead of the high number of IEDs. They've been less number and larger in size and explosive power.
Does this lead you to believe is it just simply a change, or do you think there are essentially new bomb makers, new designers that have entered Iraq? Because in the past, you have noticed the emergence of new designs and you've speculated that there have been new people making them. What do you think's going on here?
I think it's too early to tell at this point right now, but we'll continue to watch that carefully like they have been in both the efforts that General Corelli mentioned. It seemed to be making some positive impact on the challenge.
And can I just also follow up, these new types of IEDs you're seeing, location-wise, are they across the country? Are they mainly in Baghdad? Are they in the Sunni Triangle? Where are you seeing them?
It's been mainly in the Sunni Triangle.
General, to follow up on that, can you give us any sense of what they're using? Is it strapping 3 artillery shells together? Is it, plastic explosives? The sophistication.
It's been a combination of everything. The point that I was trying to make was just the explosive power of them has seemed to increase in the last couple of weeks.
But I would say, again, I would caution you to go back to Metz's characterization, which is that they've gone, his impression is they're less sophisticated, more spectacular. I think is a fair characterization of how he described it.
Good combination.
What's that?
It's not a good combination.
I'm just describing it. I'm not trying to characterize it. That's what
Can I ask you another question on a different subject?
He gave some examples, and I wouldn't want to try and repeat them. You can go back and read the transcript.
And on the budget, I have to push back a little bit here. You're saying this year, the 06 budget will be greater than...
I'm saying no decisions have been made. I think people will be able to evaluate when the numbers come out.
PBD describes cuts after 08 of $30 billion. 06 and 07 are largely neutral, so...
We'll talk numbers when the budget comes out.
Well, I just want to clarify that because
I told you what I told you.
Has OMB approved that PBD's numbers?
We'll talk numbers when the budget comes out.
I'm not asking numbers, but just general concept.
Your question ended in the word numbers, question mark.
I didn't say the number.
New topic.
Can I go back?
Maybe we got time for 1 or 2 more.
Back to the elections. Is the current thinking that offensive operations between now and January 30th will allow elections to take place in all 18 provinces?
I think when General Metz talked about that was exactly what he was talking about. That we're going to focus all our energy and efforts on trying to get the elections to be as best as they possibly can be secured for the 30 January elections, and he's focusing on those 4 areas that he talked about.
I'll give you another crack.
Okay, talking about the budget, is there...
okay.
Yeah, my last question. Numbers.
You didn't do very well in your previous one.
Is there any link between the increasing of the budget for the Army of $25 billion and the consequences of the war in Iraq?
First of all, I'm not talking numbers. I think I made that clear. You used a number which I'm not going to acknowledge. The Army is going through a transformation. It is everybody's desire that that transformation proceed as rapidly as it's possible. And you'll see, I believe that our budget will reflect that. The war in Iraq, up until now, for a variety of decisions that have been made between the Congress and the executive branch, has been principally funded through supplemental appropriations. So it's in a sense, a separate matter. Last question, ma'am?
This is not a numbers question.
Two more. New subject,
Okay.
no numbers.
New subject. Subject and questioner.
Specialist Grainer went on trial this morning. His lawyer says not only whatever he did, he was following orders, but that he questioned some of the orders and he was told by senior commanders, this is legal and go ahead and do it. Can you say for sure that that didn't happen?
Well, I can't comment on the specifics of a criminal trial, and that's what he's ongoing, is a criminal trial. There was no policy and none of the investigations that have been concluded to date have been able to draw a connection between the activity at Abu Ghraib, in particular the activity that Specialist Grainer was alleged to have participated in, and any approved policies of this department. And I'll leave it at that.
We could both go for him.
Wolfowitz.
Can you shed any light on his future?
He's doing a terrific job. He's got a man of enormous capability, and he's serving as the Deputy Secretary of Defense.
The Secretary asked him to stay, and has he agreed to stay?
I can't comment on. I mean, I just don't know the nature of the individual. I think Paul's intention is to stay. He's serving in the job. I think it's a job that the Secretary would be very happy if he did stay in it. He's performing magnificently and is value added in everything he's involved in.
Definite, then do you think he's going to stay?
I don't. I'll stick with what I said. He's doing great, and he's in the job. And as far as I understand, he intends to stay in the job, and the Secretary would be very happy if he did.
Is there any reason he wouldn't stay?
Could you, General, could you set our expectations for this election and security? I can anticipate a situation where things could go pretty well in 15 or 14 provinces, and there could be some spectacular car bombs in some others. What are you guys looking at to say, all in all, practically, this is a good result, or this is much worse than what we had expected? What would be a reasonably good result given the realities on the ground there?
Clearly the Iraqi people are going to be the ones who determine the success of the election and legitimacy of how that goes, and that's what we're trying to support the interim Iraqi government in accomplishing, so that they have a free and fair election as best as it possibly can happen.
Right, but you guys have the responsibility for security.
That's correct.
And so, what is an outcome on the ground that you think, okay, that'll be pretty good? Like, you've got to be coming up with some best case and worst case scenarios.
We want as many people as want to vote be able to get to the polling stations and cast their vote. That's what the goal is. That's what we continue to focus on, and we'll continue to take the operations required to get there.
Okay, but reality of satellite television and the way things are, and you guys are going to complain about this the day after. If there are cameras at one car...
We'll complain about it now then. Give us a crack.
If there's a car bomb and there are cameras there, the world is going to look at this election. There's going to be a lot of hand-wringing about it. It shouldn't have gone on. The security was too bad, or this whole thing was a disaster. What is the metric you guys are going to be using at that point to say, you know what, there was one car bomb, but that's okay because we were afraid of 50, or if there are 10, that's within the bounds of what we were expecting, and we will have considered that a success?
I don't think there's any metrics established that I know of at this
It was
point.
your example, not mine. That's the way it happened in Afghanistan. And the contemporaneous reporting of the elections was, this is really bad. There's all kinds of challenges and conflicts. And about 6 weeks later, they inaugurated a president. So, there will be a National Assembly that comes out of this election. And that's a great thing, and that's the metric. There will be an election, and there will be a National Assembly. Last question.
One of the early goals from commanders on the ground was that the elections be held without U.S. troops in U.S. uniforms standing outside the polling sites, and that it be handled almost entirely by the Iraqi security forces. Is that possible given the state of affairs now?
General Metz discussed that the other day. He said that is the plan. They continue to coordinate that plan with the interim Iraqi government as well as the Iraqi security forces, that those are the people that are closest to the polling stations, and the United States is there to support, the United States and coalition forces are there to support them as required.
Thanks a lot, folks. Have a great weekend.
Go to cspan.org.